Kate DiBartolo of the Conversation Project is talking with us about advanced care planning and how to talk about what matters most to you. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer, here with Jerry Fenter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This is one of our favorite organizations, the Conversation Project.
Absolutely. They have so much good information there. And here's one of the reasons why we like it.
I know what you're going to say.
It's free.
It's free. It's free. And it's not just free like you have to go in and print it out. It's free. You can save it to your computer. You can edit your document and save it with your edits in it. Your documentation in it, and then you can email it to people that need to see it.
And I think it's even free where you don't even have to provide your email address. Many places you go and they're like, oh, I'll give you something for free, but I want your email address.
Right.
I don't think they even ask for that.
That's really great.
It is really good. So we're glad to have Kate DiBartolo with us today. She is the one who oversees the Conversation Project, and she is leading the Conversation Project team and the operations. She manages and cultivates relationships with national and state level organizations that help to engage the general public in advanced care planning. This is what the Conversation Project is really all about, is encouraging conversations. And I said it with a plural for a reason. You'll hear about that later on.
Yes.
But about advanced care planning. So
here's our conversation with Kate DiBartolo of the Conversation Project.
Kate, we are so glad to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The Conversation Project has some amazing resources, and we've been talking about you guys and name dropping for years on the podcast. Advanced care planning is your specialty, and you guys are awesome at it. One of the biggest resources you have is the Conversation Starter Guide. Tell us how the guide can be utilized by individuals that are doing their advanced care planning.
Well, thank you for name dropping us over the years. That's kind of how we help get the word out. Just so everybody knows, all of our guides are available for free. They're on our website in English, Spanish, Chinese. There's also an audio or video version of it in case that's helpful for people. And while we have our suggestions of how people can use it, I think that doing kind of a quick look over of the materials and deciding what's best for you is important. Some people like to work through our materials on their own first, privately, and then have conversations based on their answers. Others like to do it side by side with someone. We think that the conversation guide is so important so that when people are doing their advanced care planning, if they're not just filling out forms and leaving them in a filing cabinet somewhere and not talking about it. Somebody finds a manila folder years later saying, I wish we had talked about this resource. So you can fill out our materials online or print them out and mark them up with a pen. That's how I like to do it. I tend to be a tactile learner. And we just walk people through some open-ended questions. A lot of folks, when they're doing advanced care planning, will say, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I don't know what to talk about. There's no right or wrong answers. We try to offer some open-ended questions, as well as some questions where we provide kind of a range of answers. For example, when it comes to your medical treatment, are you concerned about too much treatment or too little? No right or wrong answer, but people fall along that spectrum somewhere. And then we can give you some examples of how you could talk about that or some possible icebreakers to bring up. I would say people listening to this today have a great excuse of, I was listening to this wonderful podcast and it made me realize we could go through this guide. So that tends to be how people use the Conversation Starter Guide is, how do I either bring this up for the first time with someone? I don't know how to ask somebody what their wishes are or to tell them my own, or to really think through what your own answers might be so you can have that conversation.
So I will tell you that I actually use the Conversation Starter Guide myself. I downloaded it, and I love it because it actually is a fillable PDF.
Yeah.
So if you're a tech kind of person, you can just download it electronically and then fill in all of the information that you want to add to it. And that's what I did. And I found it so refreshing. In fact, probably Well, we'll go into this more a little bit later in another episode to talk about how Helen and I are actually going to complete our advanced care plans. But one of the tools that I used was the Conversation Starter Guide from the Conversation Project. So I really love that you guys are offering this and letting people download it for free.
Yes. Our tip would be to save it to your desktop or save it first, then you make your edits. But it's also so much easier than perhaps to send it as an email or to attach it to something, tell people, here's my special folder if you need important documents, or email it to say, I'd love to talk to you about this the next time I see you. But this way you just have it on hand in case you ever need to pull it up.
Yeah. And so full of good tips too.
We're gonna hire you.
He's your spokesperson, definitely.
Yeah.
So the Conversation Project has some other resources, because we know starting those conversations, that really sets a process in motion that is multifaceted. There's so many different things to talk about. One of the most important things that people need to talk about is choosing a healthcare proxy or a medical power of attorney, or to put it in just layman's terms, someone who can speak for you about what your decisions would be when you can't speak for yourself. You also have a resource for someone who needs to be a healthcare proxy. What are the important things to consider first when choosing, and then what to consider if you're going to actually be someone's proxy?
Yeah, so these came about organically, where we started with the Conversation Starter Guide, and then people were saying, well, I don't know who I should pick to do this, or my mom just asked me to be a proxy and I've got no idea what that means or what I'm supposed to do, or what additional information I need to know. And I think that, when trying to think about who to choose, different things matter to different people when it comes to selecting a proxy. For some people, it's really important that their wishes be honored as they've described them. So it's really important to pick a proxy who will do as you wish. You make the choice, they can be your voice, but you want somebody who's going to do what you want, not what they would want for themselves in that scenario, which I think can be an important thing to think about. Especially if those wishes are different from your own. So I would say it doesn't always have to be the oldest child or a spouse. There's a lot of times people think they have to choose somebody to be their proxy, when we're really encouraging you to think of, who do you think would listen to what you want, be able to speak up for you or ask questions of the medical team and feel like they could handle that. I remember there was a woman in Hawaii who was trying to pick her proxy, and she originally discussed her wishes with her husband, who said, absolutely not. I couldn't do that for you. I would sit by your side for 20 years in a vegetative state. I don't make me make any of those decisions. So she asked her oldest daughter, who cried nonstop and couldn't have the conversation. So she moved on to the son, who said, I got it, Mom. You don't want any intervention ever. I'll never let anybody hook you up to a machine. You're good to go. And she was like, didn't say that either. And it was her youngest child, who she had not thought was going to be able to handle it, who really listened to what she said, understood that depending on the prognosis, she might want to try some intervention, but not others. And that's who she chose to be her proxy. So it mattered to her who was going to listen to what she was actually saying and honor those wishes. I know other people who say, I just want it to be my spouse, or I want it to be my child. And I actually don't really care what they choose. I want them to feel comfortable in the moment. And that's important. That's your conversation right there. That's what you can talk to about with them. So yeah, for some people, they care less about the medical choices and more about the personal dynamics within a relationship. And that is fine too. So just thinking about what makes you most comfortable. And I guess I would just say a big tip can be to be sure that you speak closely with your proxy or the agent or the person you've chosen about what you would want. In our conversation guides, we don't get into a lot of medical or legal hypothetical scenarios. We know that you can't talk about every hypothetical scenario, but you can talk about your values and what matters most to you, so that if somebody had to make choices on your behalf, they would understand that. So you can talk about that with the proxy, but also tell other people who you chose as the proxy. That can save a lot of trouble for folks later. So I remember a woman in Florida who was talking to us, and she said, I'm my husband's proxy. We've talked about it. I know everything he wants, but I'm his second wife, and he has adult children from a previous relationship, and they don't know that he's chosen me. And I'm realizing now he can help avoid so much conflict if he just says, hey guys, wanted you to know Barbara's in charge. Like, I want you to come and visit me if anything happens, but she's making the decisions. So it avoids that conflict that can happen later. Or my mom is one of 7. She was the proxy for her parents, but the other siblings all knew that. So to have it just be like, you don't have to have a really intense conversation with everybody, but maybe just giving everyone the heads up of who you've chosen can really go a long way towards avoiding confusion and conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah, communication is the key, right? So, Kate, you had said something a little bit earlier about wanting to make sure that we honor what matters most to the individual. And the Conversation Project actually has a workbook called What Matters to Me. So I think I'm going to have to use that one at some point for myself. When's the best time for someone to take that workbook and fill it out, complete it? And I assume they also need to then share it with their proxy, but when's the best time to do that?
Yeah. So we created this guide with the folks at Ariadne Labs. They have a lot of great resources for clinicians who want to talk to patients about a serious illness, but we felt like something was missing for individuals or caregivers or someone with a serious illness. So that particular workbook never mentions end-of-life scenarios. It's really more for someone who maybe recently received a new diagnosis or prognosis, maybe had a sudden injury. They're really kind of living with a serious illness at the moment, and they're trying to think through their future care and what matters most to them, how they want to share that with important people in their life. So it's a really good thing to look through before having conversations to get your thoughts in order. It's a little bit geared towards somebody living with a serious illness at the moment. So some of the questions are somewhat similar to our conversation starter guide, but it's a little bit more meant to be a workbook before you're talking with anybody so you can think about what matters most. I think in many of our conversations about advanced care planning, we're asking people not to think about all sorts of hypothetical scenarios. You want to answer questions with your current body and mind, not answering for something that might happen in 30 years or a diagnosis you haven't even received. But once you have received a diagnosis, it can be really helpful to say, with the information I have now, or is there information I'm missing that would help me continue to make these decisions? That's what that workbook is really to help with.
I really like that. Somebody who's entered into a serious illness, because that's the time when that advanced care planning gets very real, very real. And I think sometimes for people who are seriously ill, it's even harder to have those conversations because you're looking at anticipatory grief, you're looking at financial burden, you're looking at exhaustion and illness and maybe overwhelm with decisions. And just the effects of the illness itself. So having the workbook to sort of prompt and support you, I think it could be really important.
And one reason we created it is, I think in many ways our conversation guide would work, but it does reference end-of-life scenarios, and that can be a bit overwhelming if you just received a new diagnosis or you have a diagnosis that you're going to recover from or live well with for a while, or again, it could have been an accident and a recovery process. So to have something that is just focused on what matters and your treatment right now can be a little bit easier to introduce with someone. So especially for listeners who are not only thinking about their own wishes, but how to bring this up with someone else, that workbook could be good if you have someone in your life who might be more sensitive to talking about end-of-life issues.
Right. And I like the fact that the Conversation Project really doesn't encourage people to look at every possible scenario, but instead to look at a broader picture and say, okay, this is what I want. These are the things that matter most to me, instead of just saying, well, what if this happens? Oh, well, but what if this happens? Well,
how could you possibly imagine every single scenario?
That's just it. It gets overwhelming after a while.
Yeah.
We joke that it should have been the Conversations Project because we don't want this to only happen one time and you never revisit it. So you could have the conversation today about what matters most to you right now. What would somebody need to know if something unexpected occurred? But we encourage people to bring this up regularly, or maybe something changes your mind. We've heard so many examples of people who've had these conversations and then something in their personal life changes. Or I remember a gentleman in his 90s who originally didn't want any additional intervention taken, but he got full ICU care. His doctor was so confused. What are we doing here, Mr. Jones? It's like, I have my first great-grandchild that's going to be born in 2 weeks, and I will do everything I can to be here to meet that baby. That is a perfect example of how medical solutions should match what somebody's wishes are, and that those conversations can change and adapt over time.
I think that's a good point for healthcare people to remember. Our patients can change their minds, and that's okay.
Yes.
Absolutely. Whether you change it because you want more treatment, or you've decided you don't want any treatment, you don't even want testing, biopsies, surgery, whatever, that can change. So we were talking about this earlier when we were off the recording. What are the times or scenarios where people should revisit their advanced care planning?
So I'd start with early and often. So right now, if you haven't done it, this would be a good time, or if it's been a while. Honestly, when somebody turns 18 and they're potentially moving out of the house, or a parent isn't an automatic decision maker for them anymore, it's a great chance if somebody's moving to another state or going away to school. National Healthcare Decisions Day is every April 16th, and it's a great cadence to just have it every year revisit. I think major life events. So that could be marriage or divorce, having children, changing jobs, a death in the family, something that might influence who you would pick as your proxy, or where you might be based. A major trip. I mean, my dad did a cross-country motorcycle trip for a month, and we had a conversation about what would you want if you're in a motorcycle accident is a little bit different than a healthcare episode that might play out. And then if you're newly diagnosed with a serious illness, again, if you have a better sense of a prognosis that might be worth talking about, that could be one. And I would say sometimes there's stories in the news, or a TV show you watch that makes you think, ooh, that's actually what I would want. Or did you hear about this? I don't think I like that. So that's where we talk about conversations, is when you see something that inspires you to be like, I do or don't want that thing, tell somebody about it. But yeah, I would say today is the number one time to do it, and then to continue with some of those others as well.
I would add also that when your healthcare provider changes, if you end up having to change physicians, or you add another physician, a specialist, you want to make sure you have those conversations, because let's face it, our team members do change. Healthcare is an ever evolving.
Well, and given that, and that something could occur when you're visiting a family member in another state, and you might not even be with your healthcare team, that's all the more reason for the people within your personal life to know if they can, and not to assume the healthcare team is always going to be able to access your wishes. I remember talking to somebody who said, oh yes, I had shoulder surgery 13 years ago. I had to fill out a form. I'm sure my doctor's office has that on file. And I was just in a panic of like, I assure you, they do not have that paper copy on file. And you need to be sure you talk about this.
Oh my gosh. My mother, I think, has said that exact statement. My mom has this picture in her head that her physicians, she's got like 4 or 5 doctors, that they all get together and have coffee and talk about her. And it's really sweet, but it's a very outdated and very unrealistic perception of how healthcare providers collaborate. You know, it's supposed to be a continuum, and we have to admit that, you know, as an industry, our ability to provide a smooth flow through the healthcare continuum is not all that great.
We could do a whole other call.
That's a new podcast. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, Kate, the Conversation Project has always been, to Helen and I, such an important project, such an important work that you do. And so we are so thankful that you and your team and everything that the Conversation Project offers is available to people. And so tell us how our listeners can utilize the resources of the Conversation Project to support their own advanced care planning.
Yeah, so you can check out our website. That's the main place to go. It's theconversationproject.org. You can poke around there. If you click on Get Started, you'll see all of our free guides. So we've talked about our conversation guide, or how to be a healthcare proxy. We have one for how to talk to a healthcare team, or how to, resources for caregivers with somebody with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. We have a lot of resources there. So you can download the free guides there, but also maybe follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're often sharing little snippets or lessons learned from people there. Folks could sign up for our newsletter, but I think, once you find them, just start the conversations yourself, continue them with people in your sphere of influence. I think we often hear from folks who once they start talking about it with the people in their life, it just continues to snowball in a really good way. And they get very inspired to kind of keep it going and be a champion for it in their own communities.
Awesome. I'll have links to everything in the show notes so our listeners can access the Conversation Project and connect with your social media as well.
Great. Thank you both so much.
So good to talk to you, Kate, from the Conversation Project. You're a blessing to so many people.
Thank you.
I think it's a good thing they didn't call it the Conversations Project, because I don't know that I could say that. That's a whole lot hard. The Conversations Project.
Right.
Project.
But it's a lot more accurate. And
it is.
It's what people need to do. It's not just a one and done.
Right.
Okay, so let's look at it from this perspective. When was the last time you had your will changed or redone?
You are a bad person.
I know.
Are you seriously going to make me answer that? 2013. And before that, I didn't even have a will. My kids are so excited. They are 32 and 29. They're going to go to my sister.
Right. And your sister's like, oh, no, they're not.
I don't want these grown people.
Right.
But yeah, 2013.
Yeah. And I think the last time I had one was probably about 2010. So I had two children still at home at that time and don't have any of them at home right now.
So no updates.
No updates. No. And we can't do that with advanced care planning. And that's one of the things I really liked about our conversation with Kate, is because she reminded us it's not a one and done. And it needs more than just one conversation, because even our own wishes can change because of circumstances in our lives, just like the man that she talked about who was waiting for his great-grandchild to be born.
Right. He changed what he wanted. So you notice one thing she never said was legal document, legal in your state, legal in your province. We didn't talk about that. That's not what the Conversation Project resources are for. They're to talk about what you would want, how to choose a healthcare proxy, what it's like to be a healthcare proxy. And then when you're diagnosed with a serious illness, what's going to matter to you? Not specific healthcare choices like a diagnosis-specific directive, like for Alzheimer's or dementia. That's not in there. I think this is more reflective. Let's start these conversations. These are the beginnings. That's why they call it a conversation starter guide. These are the beginnings of the conversations that you have so that you can create the legal documents that will be part of your advanced directives.
Absolutely. So our thanks to Kate and her team for all that they have done to put this together. They've made it easy. They've made it simple. And all we need to do is to take advantage of what they have created for us. So our thanks to them for all this wonderful, wonderful team of resources that they have put together.
So check out theconversationproject.org. Download their free resources for communities, faith communities, individuals choosing a healthcare proxy. Choose the language that you need because it comes in multiple languages, and check them out on social media as well.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.